There we go.
Okay, well, yeah, welcome everyone. So you are here at a Knowledge Bites webinar, which is something that we've been doing for a long time, kind of doing webinars back before webinars were cool. Here with the Southern Vermont Economy Project. So we're a program of Brattleboro Development Credit Corporation. We get funding through a USDA Rural Community Development Initiative, and our mission is to help provide resources, training, and technical assistance where needed to help local projects succeed. So kind of growing out of the Get On Board uh, program that we did last fall and into January, we just have been wanting to offer more resources to our municipalities who just do so many projects and really need capacity and training as much as the rest of us. So we are doing this Municipal Leaders Series. We did last week welcoming new residents, and that has been recorded and is up on our website. I'll share the link where you can find all those. Today, we're talking about sharing municipal staff. And next week will be, or 2 weeks from now, I should say, we'll have VLCT in, and they will be talking about all their many training resources, on call, on demand resources, and just all the many things they have for you. And then Rachel and I are going to do a presentation the week after that on May 15th, where we talk about kind of what we learned through our Get On Board class. And we've kind of developed some resources that town boards can use and or just nonprofit boards. So today we have Scott Pickup with us, who is the town manager in Rockingham. And he's going to talk about their experience with sharing municipal staff, sort of how that happened for them, how it's worked out, any lessons learned along the way. And we'll definitely take questions. And then if there's other questions that we can't answer today, we'll take them down and connect you with the right person to answer them. So with that, I think I'll just stop my screen share and turn it over to Scott to just tell the story of Rockingham.
Okay, so thanks again. So really, it's a story of three communities. So we had an issue with land use, trying to come up with planning and land use professionals to serve Rockingham and Bellows Falls. We had the same issues with some of our neighbors. So Windsor, for example, and Weathersfield, we're also having issues trying to come up and hire qualified land use professionals. So we got together, municipal managers in Southern Vermont get together periodically, and I see Shane O'Keefe's on our list here. Shane's part of these conversations. And we talk about these problems and try to brainstorm it. Periodically, we actually do come up with some, at least, opportunities to try to come up with a solution. In this case, we decided, let's look and see if we can share the position, because land use, as most of you know, has times where it's busy and other times where maybe it's not as busy. And so we were able to work out basically a time sharing arrangement with two positions. So we've hired two different professionals who are handling a variety of issues for us, whether it's our town plan, it's our planning commission meetings, it's our DRB, it's enforcement. So all the things that we're doing in land use that we have to do, we're doing a zoning bylaws update here as well that requires a significant amount of staff time and input. So by sharing these two positions, and we created an intermunicipal agreement, the three communities, we brought it to our elected boards, talked to them about how this might work, went and talked to the planning commissions and the other land use boards and talked to them about how this might work. And from my initial responses were a little mixed. People were concerned, didn't think that it was necessarily going to work. It's a new idea. There's always caution, some concern. We weren't going to get enough support. Things weren't going to work. The workflows weren't going to work. And so we took that into consideration. We broke down how many hours of support each community needed. We looked at our meeting schedules to make sure that we could make the meetings so that one of the folks could be available to do the meetings. And in some cases, they come here physically. In other cases, they're hybrids. And then making sure that we were covering all the things that had to be covered to support those boards. When we started the project, going out, finding a couple of people that filled those were willing to work with us on something that was somewhat undefined. Because again, when you're working with three communities, it's a little bit of a concern up front. People weren't, real clear as to how this was going to work, but they were willing to go with it. So the town of Windsor was actually the hiring agent. So they handle the hours that people work as well as any of the other issues of employment. And they also then bill the other two communities for the hours of the staff time that's used through the intermunicipal agreement. So that's worked pretty well. The boards itself, it took some orientation and ramp up time in order for the three boards to feel comfortable, understand how the process works in each community. Every board, land use board, is a little different. A lot of the things are the same, your postings and your meeting agendas and your how their process works, but you have to obviously work through each of those communities to feel comfortable. That took a little bit of time to get through that process. And then we've also worked out an arrangement for an online reporting form so that we do have some remote work that's handled by some of these folks as well. So it's not really a report in terms of specific hours to specific projects. It's more a report to the three town managers about what are the projects that are ongoing, things that we just need to be aware of that are taking time and resources, and that might be something that we might want to be at least aware of, not necessarily have to be directly involved in. And then if there are things that we are specifically interested in, like for us right now, we're going through the town plan and adopting our town plan. So we wanted to make sure that all of that was being worked into the arrangement so that we were all on the same page and comfortable. And we put together a Google Share file system so that these folks can work with logins and work in each of the communities and have folders so that each of the work products go to the appropriate communities, but also information can be shared if necessary between all three of us. And that's worked very well, quite frankly. It's been very helpful to us. And then the final thing that we've done is we've agreed on a periodic performance review process, because again, this is such a new situation. We wanted to make sure that the folks that we hired felt good at what they were doing, that this was work that was engaging to them, that they were satisfied, that things were working well, what's not working well, as well as the three communities could then say, hey, these are things that are working for us. These are things that we need to think about or need to maybe work on. And just to keep that discussion going so that we're addressing, some of the limitations of not physically being in the office every day, which is a little bit different. That hybrid work thing is, it's not what I grew up doing. I'm sure most of the folks on this call, it's not what we're used to doing, but I think it's going to be something we're going to have to get comfortable doing. So we're figuring out those challenges. Some of them require boundaries, right? You don't want to burn these people out and have them feel like they're always available 24/7. But you also certainly have to have defined periods where work has to get done. There are deadlines. There are all sorts of other procedures that have to be followed. So you want to make sure that you have enough hours in that contract to get that work done. We have not tweaked the contract hours yet. That'll probably come up at some point. We'll sit down as the three communities and look at what we've been doing, how things are working, and then do we need to tweak hours or other areas within the current IMA to see to keep it up to date and keep the process working. The community boards have, I think, like I said, initially were a little bit suspect. They were, I think, wary of the situation because they like to have a full-time person and somebody that was all their person, so to speak. But they have adjusted, and now I think, quite frankly, they are advocating. They enjoy how this is working. They understand that I think they're getting quality services from folks that each community individually would not have been able to afford. Big challenge for all of us is hiring and paying professional staff. It's difficult when we're all challenged with our budgets and how much money can we realistically spend and where can we go to try to stretch those dollars. And in our minds, this kind of arrangement made sense. I would say so far, I would say it's working better than we anticipated. I thought there would be more technical problems on trying to do the workflows and trying to share the information and data. But again, I guess the reality of it is technology has advanced to the point where remote work is really supported a lot now by technology, and it's not as daunting, I think, as I thought it was going to be. So we've been able to keep workflow tracked, understood where everything stands, and if we had to get things specifically addressed, the workflow for all of us, it's easy for me to jump in, figure out what I need to know, and either get something with an email or some other type of arrangement. I don't have to necessarily have somebody face to face where I can go and track down a concern or a problem or an issue. And now the big challenge is going to be as we go forward, how much of the enforcement of zoning is going to take up time for these positions because as we all know, there's always issues in land use, always. And land use issues are not simple. They take time, they take research, they take in cases, in some cases it has to go through a process in order for somebody to be able to address the issue if and hopefully resolve the issue, but it takes time. So we're working on that phase of this arrangement. That's going to be the next challenge for us. I think we've really addressed the workflow with the boards, the workflow with the specific responsibilities of land use. Now the issues for us really are going to get into how does the enforcement really work in each community because it's a little different. We all have different ordinances and different zoning bylaws. And then are there glitches or in that process or ways that we can make that process work so that it's not a huge burden on the two folks that we currently have in contract. So that's the next challenge or challenge we're working on currently. But overall, this has been a great experience for our three communities. We've been able to use the power of three communities to get two folks in place that we would not have been able to afford individually. And I think we're all getting the benefit of that enhanced professionalism and folks that we would not have been able to get their, we would not have been able to support their salaries as just each individual community. And we negotiated all the deals and the boards were aware up front. So all of this was done with all three of our elected boards along in approving as we went through the process. So I think the other critical piece and why this is working is you do have to get buy-in from your select board or your elected officials to make sure that as you go down the road that they are behind you and supporting the initiative and understanding that there might be some issues as you go through and develop this new work model, but that they'll be patient and work through the challenges with you and hopefully then continue to support this as we go forward because we're getting a level of service that I think is helpful and beneficial to the community. So far, that has been the case. And so the boards have been supportive, the land use boards have been supportive, and we seem to be in a good place with the program. Now we're tweaking some of the aspects that we think will be sort of community specific when you get into some of the issues of enforcement. So that's going to be probably our next big challenge as we try to move this process forward. The IMAs were all done in public sessions. We drafted those, and so the boards had a chance to review it. If your attorney or whoever else wants to review it, that's always a good idea too. So everybody's comfortable with what they're agreeing to do. We didn't have any issues, quite frankly. The process worked fairly smoothly. So from the time we started talking about this to implementation, probably took us in the neighborhood of 2 to 3 months. Once the IMAs were in place, it took probably another month or two to go through and interview candidates, select candidates, and then work out the relationships on the employment aspects and making sure that everybody was up to speed, and then getting into that orientation process. And my biggest takeaway is that you need to spend the time up front orienting your land use people and your land use process with these new folks so that they can hit the ground running. In some cases, they've made some improvements to our process, which has been beneficial. The technology is there to help support it. So that's been another critical piece that works very well for us, makes this process work. You have to have a laptop, the ability for somebody to sign in to a specific email address and then work within the three communities. So IT has to be involved a little bit in that in order to make it work. And with your access to files and access to things, you do have to work out all of those issues, but those were not insurmountable. And quite frankly, I think it was easier than I anticipated it to be. So overall, it's one area that I think it works well. We've heard complaints, and we're all struggling in all of our professional services, trying to hire and retain quality people. Quite frankly, the next one that I see for us that's going to be a major issue is trying to find municipal attorneys. We have a few in Southern Vermont, and most of them you guys already know who they are. And there's not a lot of new folks coming into the field. So when we lose the ones that we currently have, I think we're going to have a heck of a time trying to find people to step in and take over that responsibility and be able to help support us and support the elected board. So if it works in the land use and planning arena, I'm pretty confident it could work in those kinds of services like legal as well. A little more of a relationship with the select boards, but I still think it could ultimately give us maybe a pool of people that we might not have been able to gather by just looking at individual communities and their individual needs. So if we extend out and look at other services, that's probably what I would say would be the next potential area that we would explore. The other one I've heard a lot of chatter about is assessing and trying to figure out listers and people that are doing that work. That one's a little more political, honestly. Don't know how that one would work. It would work in this environment. The IMAs could work, the services could work. The definition of the work is not that difficult. I think the challenge is, again, the way that the listers functions work in each community can be quite different and a little bit maybe, each community has a different level of service, and the politics of each community might make it difficult to share that service. But the model here does work. It's just a question of people willing to invest and understanding that it's going to be a little uncomfortable when you start, and you're going to have to be able to get through that period and then get to a point where now we feel really good about what we're doing. So just a little bit of an overview of the program we put together. The IMA was something we had already had, and most communities do have IMAs. You probably have them for things that you've done with, I guess, even FEMA, I think requires us now to have them for sharing staff if we have, disasters and what have you. You probably have some kicking around somewhere in town. Certainly, if you don't, we can send you a copy of ours. We'd be more than happy to do that and just use it as a template and just adapt it, to whatever your specific needs and requirements are. Really, the big challenge for each of these is to figure out what the scope of services are that you're really looking for. And that's just each individual. So that's really probably the best thing that I could do to share with everyone. And the only other sharing point that I would definitely make is you need to make sure that you talk to the elected officials early in the process, make sure that they understand what you're doing and they're supportive, because it does take time and energy to put this together. So you don't want to go out, invest all your energy into putting something together, and then have the board at some point decide, well, maybe this isn't a good idea, or we don't feel comfortable with this, or, geez, we're not really ready to do this. Because at that point, then you've really put yourself in a spot where you've taken a lot of your own time and wasted your energy. And that, none of us have unfortunately, none of us have that luxury. We really are all strapped for time. So those would be the two big takeaways I would give anybody if you're considering this type of, moving ahead with this type of arrangement.
Okay, well, we have some great questions popping into the chat.
Oh, good.
And so, well,
Okay.
first of all, Edie Edwards, hello, Edie, says, please would love to share the IMA for a template. So if that's something that
Right.
you could share, we'd be happy to, or I can connect you directly. Maybe Edie, I can connect you directly. And I
Sure.
can just look and see if there's one that's just online, like a generic one. So Edie, I'll look for that, and then maybe I can connect you guys for
Meg,
that.
I can just email you. I'll email you
Okay,
ours. At some point, you can post it. If the
perfect,
folks that came on want it, they can certainly share it. So I'd be
wonderful.
happy to share
Okay,
it with you.
thank
Yep.
you. That's great. So we'll get that out when we share the recording, and
Okay.
then we have another question about more about IT implementation, and I had a question about that. So.
Yep.
For example, you know, often towns just an email address. Like, how does that work? Because a lot of towns have like an email address that's like zoning at, you know, their town or whatever. So do these individuals that you have that do your planning and zoning, do they have a dedicated email for each town that then gets redirected to another account? How does that work for communication? And then just any other like, yeah, just IT implementation. So I understand you have a shared Google Drive file for sharing documents, but I'd be curious
Right.
about, you know, how that works with just getting communication directly to the person that needs it.
So yeah, so everybody right on their website has some sort of connect to the staff. So each of those particular communities, so it's us in Weathersfield and Windsor, they do have an email address, but then there's a way that they can then have all of that feeding into the primary person's name. So they get emails from me, they get emails from Tom in Windsor, they get emails from Brandon in Weathersfield, and that's basically then they can work, you know, from each of their, and plus they also have to obviously communicate with each of their land use boards. So they do that with each of their, you know, with each of those sign-ins. So there is some management that is involved. The shared files is another thing. Again, IT Windsor's been very helpful in that respect. You know, Google has a tremendous amount of capacity. So we've been able to do a lot of things through Google that made that process easy. And so they were able to keep the workflows for Weathersfield and Windsor and Bellows Falls and Rockingham separate, so they can do the work that they need to, and basically share all the data they need to share. So that's worked out very well.
And so we have another question that just popped in from Edie. This
Okay.
is a good one. So do these positions have benefits? And then, so is Windsor handling all that and then billing the cost back?
They do. They have benefits, and that's also, so we pay on a contract basis, we pay a salary plus benefits number. So that's shared based on the number of hours for each of these positions. And the two positions aren't the same, so one is paid a little differently than the other because they're doing some different types of functions. At some point, we might, again, if this goes and expands, there's always a capability of doing other things with that. But right now, yeah, Windsor's handling that, and then they bill that back. So that is covered.
Okay, now Shane has a couple great questions here. So
Right.
his thoughts about, you know, is there a Windsor employee issuing a notice of a violation in another town? How does that work, and how is that covered so that that person has the authority to issue that notice in, you know, Rockingham, for example?
Well, so in our case, the planning and zoning administrator is appointed by our board. So they are appointed. So even though they're appointed in Windsor as well, they're appointed in Bellows Falls and they're appointed in Weathersfield. So that they have the capacity to issue, um, you know, issue zoning violations, do all the things they have to do. So there are, you know, each board appointed them to be able to officially undertake those duties and responsibilities.
So that's good. And I assume is that covered somewhat in the intermunicipal agreement as well, or is that just laying out in your agreement? Does that just lay out the kind of framework of who's paying who?
Well, we laid out in the framework a little bit of the hours of allocation, and I know that was one of Shane's questions because we each looked at how many hours did we need from each position based on the number of meetings. We put together a formula about how much time does it take to prep for a meeting, how much time is the actual meeting, then how much time is required after the meeting in order to do the updates with all of the different decisions or whatever other activities might take place. So we based that on, we took a little bit of a, we put together sort of a historical reference and said, okay, we think it's this number of hours, 4 hours before a meeting might be an allocation of 3 hours, and then another 4 hours after the meeting to respond and get everything filed that needs to be filed. So, and then we have so many hours that we then dedicate to other activities within that monthly framework. So, and as we go down the line, I'd say that, we'll take a look at that probably at the 1 year mark and say, hey, are we underweighted? Do we need more support here? Do we need to spend more money there? And then, that's sort of the next phase of this to see, did we allocate everything appropriately? Are we getting everything done that we need to get done? The boards are satisfied with the level of support, and we're still, the folks that are working with us still feel good about the job they're doing. So we're still tweaking those things as we go.
I see another question here, which is a great one. What do you think the shared employees would say are their biggest challenges? What have you heard from them where they've needed support?
Actually, the biggest challenge that they had was learning each of the communities, because they are a little different, right? Everybody does basic land use, but we all have our own ordinances. We all have our own, the land use issues in Rockingham are a little different than the land use issues in Windsor. How the community reacts to various things. So I think it took some time for them to sort of understand. And now we are doing, like I said, a bylaws change and also adopting a town plan. So there's a lot of activity and trying to give them the resources when they first came in to understand and try to come up to speed. Took a little bit of time. So we built in some time just for them to learn and bring themselves up to speed before we started into meeting with boards and meeting with, the actual planning commission meetings or DRB meetings, that type of thing, so that they felt they were a little bit more up to speed before they actually started, working directly with the land use folks in the process. So that, I think, was that ramp up period was a lot of information. So I think that was probably one of the biggest things that I underestimated.
That's interesting. I can see that too, because every town has their own way of doing things and the ins and out. And I would say, just thinking for a minute, maybe about towns that don't have a town manager or don't have as much just administrative capacity in the office. I'm wondering, do you feel like there's additional burden on you as an administrator or on your other administrative staff by having the shared staff, or do you think whatever you have to put out to set things up is coming back to you by having better services? That's just sort of a question, the balance.
Right. No, there's oversight involved. If you want the project to work, you have to be a little more hands-on, certainly. So we all committed to doing that because we felt that the end product, by getting people that, we could pay a little more and have a little better experience and are probably, like I said, more out of the salary range that I could afford as an individual community, made that time worthwhile. And I think so far, because the land use boards have been, working and working into this project and seem satisfied with where we are, it's definitely worth it. So I think that's, land use is one of those things, and we all realize that it is it's a time, it's one of those areas of municipal management. It just takes time. And if you don't spend the time, then things can get much more difficult. And certainly then you're challenged to try to fix problems that you didn't address up front, so to speak, especially in land use. So I think the extra time is well worth it, and keeps you out of trouble down the road.
I like that. And Edie Edwards, I love your comment, Edie. She's realizing her needs in a very small town like Halifax are often more temporary. So medical leave, surge needs for FEMA reporting. So we need a municipal temp agency, that's it. That sounds like a good plan.
A lot of
like
places,
that, like traveling nurses.
Yeah, it's funny but that you say that, but right, a lot of communities, especially when they, now this is going to sound kind of crazy, but when you replace a manager, a lot of times they put in a retired manager or somebody to basically manage while somebody's gone until a new person is hired. And we've talked about this in our managers group that, we do have quite a few people that are going to be approaching retirement age. And having somebody with that temporary, it's almost like that senior executive service type of, approach, right? Where you have these folks that are retired, don't want to work full time, but still have all this knowledge and capability and would probably be willing to do something like that on a contract basis where they could jump in and help somebody through a reconstruction on a flood, with all the requirements from FEMA and the mitigation and filing for the hazard mitigation grants after the fact and all that kind of thing. I don't think that that's far-fetched for even communities that don't have town manager forms of government. So that's something that, maybe as it grows out of this conversation, might be something worth looking at.
Yeah, that's a great thought. I wonder how that would be, just to think about that in terms of our demographics. Anyone in the audience here who's listening, are there ideas that you've had, positions that you've thought about sharing in your community, just to kind of do a little bit of some, group thinking, what are the needs and what are the, what brought you here today? So feel free to just unmute yourself. Yeah, Shane, go ahead.
Just want to start by saying that I'm eyeing what Scott's doing in those with the other communities, because we have a zoning administrator who's a part-time employee but is also serves the same function in several other regional communities. And we're not town manager form of government, but it is something we're looking at. And he could work for, say, the town of Londonderry and provide those services to other communities. But we just did implement in Londonderry and the mountain towns a recreation director position. And it's a full-time position that just started recently, and it's covering Peru, Landgrove, Weston, Wyndham, and based in Londonderry. Same sort of process it sounds like you went through, Scott, where we
Yep.
have a local agreement, interlocal agreement with other communities, and so far so good. So
Well,
that's
that's
one
another
we've done.
one. Yeah, Shane's right about that. That's another tough one, is trying to find folks to do your recreation programming, right? Most of us don't have the full-time person, so it's a part-time thing, and it's not easy. And people, that's a tough one. That would be interesting, Shane, to see how that one works out. I hope it does.
Yeah, and also we just hired a starting today a short-term rental administrator on a part-time basis.
Oh,
And that might be a position that we could share with other communities as well. It's just getting going. We have a new ordinance that was adopted back in December that really kicks in July. So we're monitoring that to see if there's a way to expand that if there's a draw from other communities.
right. I would love to find somebody that does grants and grant writing, because, we all are, we're struggling to make ends meet. I don't think that's, news to anybody. And then everybody says, well, apply for grants, that helps your budget. And then you look at some of these grant applications and you're a single staff management team and you're like, well, when am I going to do this? Sunday at midnight? It's like you just don't have capacity or bandwidth to do all of these things. And having a pool of people that have Vermont specific backgrounds would be, I think, incredibly helpful. And the second piece of that, which is also beneficial, is a lot of these grants have an administrative, set aside within the grant. So there's another incentive, for these folks. Once the grants are awarded, there's monies available to help with the implementation and then the reporting and all the other requirements. So that's another one I'd love to take a look at and see how that might work. Because if we all could share a, some sort of a list even of folks that had that background and interest, boy, that would save us all a lot of aggravation.
We employed NIMRIC to do a organizational structural study for the town of Londonderry, and one of their primary recommendations was just that, is to get someone to be a grant writer and administrator, and in a shared position with other communities.
Yeah. And they all have deadlines. None of them, and this is before we retire from government, I would love somebody to come up with just one grant application, and then they can take your basic application, like they can do it for financial aid, for God's sakes. We can't seem to do it for grants. So every agency has to have their own grant, and you waste all this energy putting all this data over and over and over again into various forms. I mean, give me a break. It's all the same stuff. It just makes no sense that we can't have one form, one way to apply. And as long as the boards agree to the financial contributions, whatever the grant obligations are, then the rest of it should be easy. But we can't seem to get there, which really is frustrating.
I like this idea too of sort of trying to come up with what are some needs that could be aggregated, and how do we just keep talking to the right people. And I think if that gets heard from enough people, maybe that's a great idea. So we'll take all these ideas and help you all maybe figure out ways to keep pushing them forward. And I think town manager groups and if we can, I know Wyndham Regional had a group of select board chairs get together. I'd like to see that sort of keep on happening.
Right.
Yeah, so Dot says, I agree, an admin temp agency. And Hannah just mentioned from Athens that Athens and Brookline have started a conversation about sharing some highway resources. And I think that's actually one where towns are neighboring, and maybe you even share some roads that can be possible, so that you can have maybe some of the leadership position be maybe shared, and then you have your own employees who carry out the day-to-day work. I think that's a great idea, and maybe that would even help with smaller communities being able to, when you are putting out to bid your sand and salt contracts and things like that, that you might be able to kind of have a little more oomph if you have more than one town that are seeking, obviously each town has to approve things separately, but it does seem like that for smaller towns, highway resources is another one. Edie, you have your hand up, I see. Why don't you go ahead? Let's hear what Edie has to say or ask.
So I just wanted to make people aware. So I'm on the select board here in Halifax, and I'm also a Wyndham Regional Commissioner. And Wyndham Regional Commission has had the idea of helping with intermunicipal agreements and kind of helping to get them started. It's just kind of fallen off their task list, or not fallen off, but fallen lower in their task list. So just wanted to make sure everybody's aware that there is at least an interest in doing that there. So I do think that the highway resources conversation is certainly interesting to me. My folks would love to have an extra hand, or 5 sometimes, and
right.
That sense of, again, it's kind of a surge thing, right? It's like, oh, guess what? All the beavers are busy at this time of year, and now we've just worked a 10-hour day and have to go do something more. So I do think this has been a really helpful conversation to have, because it's clear that other larger towns are paving the way for some of us who are in a smaller boat of 5-person select board, no manager, a part-time administrator, and just really trying to cover the basics sometimes. And it might be me doing that grant thing at midnight on Sunday at times, so it's not great.
Well, yeah, I said that because that's what I was doing the last Sunday, because it was a grant deadline, and like everything else, unfortunately, you just run out of time. So, and it's frustrating, right? Because I think we all work hard, and there are just sometimes things that we just can't get to, so it's very frustrating.
And Scott, do you see, Edie just mentioned having a really part-time town administrator. Do you see that kind of role being something that would be a good candidate for shared services like this?
I do, because I think a lot of the managers, especially folks that are retiring, been in the business for 30 years or so, they can handle just about any type of situation that needs to be addressed. And in many cases, the select boards, as Edie was saying, it's tough. It's a part-time gig, but people have full-time expectations. So that makes it almost an impossible balancing act. It really does. And so, God bless the people that raise their hands and say, I'll run for these things, because it certainly is not, you have to get other ways to feel rewarded, because you don't always get it from the constituents that you serve. So I appreciate the folks that raise their hands and do those things. And even a simple thing like that would I think go a long way to helping these select boards, feel like they're getting work done and not feeling like they're under siege at times, which is I'm sure that's exactly how it feels because you just can't get to everything.
We have some great comments, and we're sending sad faces to poor Dot in Brookline. She's saying she just got a call 60 minutes ago that they'll be losing the assistant treasurer bookkeeper in town. So that's another shared service that people can use. That's really tough. And
finance is a tough
see.
one. That's a big time. That's a big time problem. Yeah.
Yes, and then another comment, Brookline just hired an on-call road helper as we don't provide benefits. So that's interesting, is if you can have someone who can people who can pinch hit. I know, like, if there's a big storm, then everyone's out, all hands on deck all over town. So, like, everyone put the coffee on for your plow guy. But I think there are definitely ways to think about. And I think this is a great conversation. We're getting close to our time, but I want to say thank you for people bringing questions.
Absolutely.
Scott, it's really good to hear kind of how you're, in towns that do have some administrative staff are really sort of trying this out, testing the waters and getting the, do's and don'ts and learning the lessons and sharing those. I love the sort of sense of this being an open source, community of municipal leaders. And I think that's really, if we think about it that way, is that it's sort of open source, we can learn from each other. And I think Shane and Londonderry has done a lot of stuff in their area. And I was just going to say, in some, one of the things we're learning is that, in states that have county government, oftentimes the county will pick up a lot of this stuff. And since our county government functions differently, we sort of need to be scrappy in Vermont and make our own agreements and kind of roll our own way to do it. No one is going to jump out and say, well, like, we should have county government. But, lacking that, what are the things that we can do to work together? And because so many of our towns, especially in our region, are isolated by geography, I think really taking time to talk to the people that are right around you. So, yes, Brookline and Athens, if there's ways that you can share resources, with those towns and kind of expand your capacity by working together, I think that's great. I mean, Londonderry is a great example because they work across county lines, with towns in both Windham and Bennington County. So, and your agreement is with towns in Wethersfield and Windsor, are both in Windsor County too. Yep. So you don't have to just look directly in, your service area for regional planning services or things like that. It's really like, who are the people around you who have the same needs as you. And I think the more we sort of communicate, the better. So let's keep that up and talk about, what are the resources that we have and how can we use each other, towns using, other neighboring towns. So if anyone else has any other questions, feel free to shoot them to me or, to Scott in Rockingham.
Absolutely.
And we'll work on getting you answers. And we will have, in 2 weeks, we'll have VLCT here, and they'll talk about training resources they have for municipal board members. Because again, when you see in your town, you have new select board members coming on and they're coming into that fire hose of concerns and learning how to do their job. So VLCT will talk about what resources they have available to help people just learn how to do that job. And what services they have. They do have consults on call for some, grant writing questions. And I think the more we get together and talk about what are the mutual needs, the more we can move forward with finding what those solutions are. Like if those are regional, if they're sub-regional, those are things we can all work together on. So.
Yep. And I know FEMA is
that,
pushing us all to have these agreements with our neighbors if we're sharing staff, right? The last floods in July. We had an intermunicipal agreement with Chester, so we were able to provide folks for helping, with some of the flood relief. We didn't get hit that bad in that last storm, but that's becoming more and more of the model and that expectation. So that's one of those things you need to share with select boards so they get those in place prior to the event so they don't have to scramble after the fact. And sometimes it can actually lead to you not getting reimbursed if you don't have these agreements. So it's another area that I think it's something good to share with your select boards as well.
Okay, interesting. And there's one more comment from Dot that I appreciate you, Dot. It says there may be some information sharing with Newfane and Brookline planning commissions. That sounds great. I mean, you guys are next door, and you know, so that's terrific. And they've had to move to appointment of a town treasurer since there was no one in Brookline to run, as they appointed a Newfane resident who also happens to be the Newfane treasurer. So, you know, again, like no benefits, just hourly, but that's, you know, it is a good, it's an interesting thing is if you can sort of put together an agreement where maybe you share someone with two towns and maybe then that allows you to provide those benefits. And so that basically you have a person who sort of has one salary and they're getting the benefits and then your town is paying into that. So it's sort of, that might be an interesting way to just think about how to restructure that so that you can, you know, offer a full-time job to somebody. And I think that's important too, when we're looking at attracting residents and having people who want to live here and can afford to live here. It's sort of how do you make it so that they can have that one job that pays well, that has the benefits. So they're not, you know, having to have multiple jobs and communications and hours here and hours there and things going up and down. I think it really creates stability for that employee. So, you know, I think people, as we've all learned a little more how to work remotely and a little more in flexible and we have more technology, I think this is just a great model to explore because from the employee's point of view, they can learn how to navigate that, but having the security of that full-time job and benefits is really important.
Yeah, make sure they check in after a period of time too. Do we have the right allocation of hours? Are things going the way we thought? Those updates are important because you just can't think of everything. And having that scheduled, you know, 3 months, 6 month, whatever, 9 month really does help. And it, you know, helps you to refine the agreements and make it so that it's going to be successful. And that's really the only other thing that I would pass along is just schedule that review so that you have that, you know, that and talk to the boards and say, hey, what's working, what's not working? You know, let's have a conversation.
Quick question about that, because we're going to log off pretty soon because I know people have to go eat their lunch, so if they haven't already. But when you have those reviews, who does that? Does that joint? Do you all get together with all three towns, or do they have an individual review with each?
No, we did it with all three of us because we thought it was important to try to keep that continuity. So yeah, but we've checked in individually as well. So, but I think
I just want to mention we established it's called the Mountain Towns Recreation Committee, and each of the communities has a representative to this board, and they're subject to the open meeting law, and it's a multi-town board is what we established.
That's a very good idea. Yeah, no, that's great. But I think you have to have those kinds of you know, those pieces in place because you're in, you know, you're making a lot of decisions up front and sometimes you're right and sometimes they need to be modified and tweaked, and that's okay. But in the long run, it'll make it successful. So it's worth the investment.
Well, thank you so much, everyone on the call for sharing, especially Scott for bringing your experience to this and sharing your agreements. And I think this is just a great conversation we'd like to see continue, and hope we'll see some people back in a couple weeks to talk about training for municipal board members, and then tools for strengthening local leadership is sort of our way to help people continue to bring people in to serve on those boards and then support them once they get there, because as we all know, it's not an easy job. So we look forward to continuing the conversation, and we'll get this recording out to everyone along with materials by the end of the day today.
Sounds great. I'll send that off to you as well. See you, Meg. Take care, everyone.
Thank you. Appreciate everyone. Thank you so much.